Um, so I know a bunch of you are Spur members, and thank you for that. And one of the things I start doing about this time of year in gatherings like this is working through the ideas that will become my Silver Spur speech. So if you're there, you'll hear it. It's like this is the earliest starting to think about like what's happening right now. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about like the state of the city as I see it, like what this moment is about, and I'm going to weave in my book then just see where that goes in a discussion with you guys. For most of, by the way, I got braces today. There's a line, and I feel very, so I'm just going to fess up. I don't know how to talk yet. I'm very self-conscious. And that fact that I have to be bald and have braces at the same time is just not fair. But anyway, apologies for the list, whatever else. So for most of Spur's history, I think that the people who were part of it felt like they were defending the city against hostile forces. And there's this kind of familiar story we all know about what happened after World War II. The GI Bill subsidizing single-family home mortgages in the suburbs, redlining of the inner city, meaning you couldn't get loans to buy properties. By the way, the first maps of the places that got redlined and a lot of them got urban renewed were done in San Francisco. They were published in 1937 with the WPA project to put back to work unemployed realtors. And so the WPA light maps became the template for redlining and urban renewal in all the big cities in America. And you had also then really what became the freeway plan in '39. And I think it's very, the urban renewal and public housing and freeways were New Deal ideas that got implemented in the 50s. But they had honorable progressive pedigrees behind them, which is really one of the great ironies of history. And so it wasn't just misguided federal policy, though, that was the problem in the 50s and the 60s. It was also this deeply held cultural assumption that cities didn't work. And maybe a reality that cities didn't work. They were corrupt. They were incredibly corrupt. They were congested. There had been decades of disinvestment. It was so much easier to get a house or locate a factory out in the suburbs, and these new highways to get there. And so San Francisco lost population from 1950 for 30 years. 1980 was the low point. And in New York, 1980 was the low point. In Seattle, 1980 was the low point. In Boston. And so you see this kind of population curve going down every year. And so the kind of things Spur did in the 50s and the 60s, I mean, would just crack you up. I mean, one of the major initiatives, I want to say we, but obviously I wasn't born, but the people running Spur at the time did was they went around starting neighborhood groups on the theory that they needed to get people to care about their neighborhoods rather than ignoring them and disinvesting them. It was this whole cultural agitation to recognize the intrinsic value that cities have. And so we actually had a branch office on Clement Street whose purpose was to provide technical support to neighborhood groups and start them. and we like funded that for many years. It actually spun off to, this is a weird story, but when it finally got shut down, the people who ran that office for many years ran a little business maintaining the mailing lists for all the neighborhood groups in San Francisco. And so there's this whole, there was this whole campaign to try to recognize the merit of Victorians and not have them be torn down, kind of celebrate the historic fabric. There were also bigger things like BART as a major priority, but the lens was the city is being assaulted and abandoned and disinvested in, and we are defending the city against a society that does not understand or believe in cities. And so, lo and behold, everything changed. And the low point in the census numbers is 1980, but there were already back in the 60s, there were certain urban neighborhoods in San Francisco, in New York, in Seattle, and Boston that were being recolonized by middle-class white people who grew up in the suburbs, right? Already at the neighborhood level, you had that happening. Just that in aggregate, those numbers were dwarfed by the people still leaving. It didn't start to show up in aggregate census numbers till the 1990 census, where there was population growth, which was a shock to the entire urban planning profession, which had been built on this assumption of solving the urban problem, which was synonymous with like segregation and light, and so it was just such a sea change. And of course, it's important to remember that most cities in America didn't have that turnaround, right? Most of them continued to lose population. And most census tracts in cities that were poor in 1970 are still poor. Like gentrification is a very minor story in American urbanism. It's just, it's the story in the cities where the journalists live. It's the story in our city, too, so it matters for us. It's just that most cities are not gentrified. Most inner city neighborhoods are not gentrified. It's important to sort of remember that when you talk about kind of the national urban story. There's a whole cohort of cities that has continued to lose population every year, where housing is virtually free or very affordable, and where the problem is still lack of jobs. It's not high housing costs. And so our problem is about we've got more jobs than we know what to do with, but we don't have enough housing and it's so expensive, and that's driving this kind of hyper-gentrification. That's the problem of a small cohort of U.S. cities. But for us, it demands, I think, a just complete rethinking of what the work is, what it means to be an urbanist. Because in the context of San Francisco or Oakland, we have won the argument. People agree with us that cities are good and that they want to be here. And so now the problems are actually totally the opposite. Now we have overwhelming demand to be here. And unfortunately, our political discourse and our political institutions have not caught up. They are still largely forged in that time of the 1970s when the radicals were going through their grieving process with the New Left had fallen apart and were in many cases deciding to refocus on localism as a form for their activism. And the kind of, in that crucible of that turn inward is where I think the San Francisco kind of political landscape was formed that we still live with today. And it involved a lot of things that are so incredible. They desegregated the schools. They stopped the freeway through Golden Gate Park. They stopped urban renewing neighborhoods. Right? They did all. The progressive victories of the 1970s are incredible. But they put in place a democratic system that is geared to stopping change. That after the great reversal that happened in 1980, where we started having more and more and more demand to live in the city, the institutions that stopped change became actually the cause of the problems we're in. Because, of course, our whole system is designed to make it really hard to add housing. Take a really long time. And I think the thing about housing policy, it's actually not intellectually very hard. So add more supply. Okay, so it's like 3 words, and that's all you need to know about housing policy. Okay, add more supply and build more affordable housing. So 8 words. It's intellectually not very complicated. It's politically complicated, right? The policy is very simple. The politics is very hard. And I find myself these days thinking a lot more about social change strategy rather than policy, because that's where we're failing. We know what policies to put in place. We just lose on putting it in place. And so this book I wrote, Democratic by Design, is not a book about city planning. It's a book about social change strategy, and it's an investigation into one approach to social change, which is creating alternative institutions. And the theory is that, like City Car Share as an example, you create a small but real example of the world you want to see. It's not just on paper, it actually exists. You test it out, you figure out what works and what doesn't. If it works, you try to scale it up and actually outcompete or displace the mainstream institutions. So in the case of City Car Share, the goal from the start was end private car ownership, replace it with shared mobility. And it's a theory of social change that I trace through a couple hundred years of American social movements, and including, because it's what I know the best, including a lot of movements in cities. But all my friends who read it are like, wait, it says this isn't a city planning book. I know, that was too much like my day job. So social change is where I find myself really just mulling over these days, because it's housing policy boring. If I get one more call from the national newspaper, you're really voting on whether you should have a moratorium on housing? What? It's just so, right? It's like we're all sick of ourselves already. Like, sorry. It's like humiliating. The fights we're still having. I think, I guess where I want to sort of take this now is sort of closing as well, is to pose this question. If the urbanist agenda in 1950 was to defend the city against abandonment, what is the urbanist agenda today? What does it look like? And I think it boils down to this. It's about the need to have a city that is open rather than closed. A city that people can move to, whether they're seeking cultural tolerance, still the ability to be out and gay, whether they're seeking to be part of a political or cultural avant-garde, whether they're coming here to for economic opportunity because they want to make a living, they want to make money. Any of those reasons count. Having the urbanist agenda today involves caring about your city being open so that people can come. I think the kindest, the most generous description I think you could give to the kind of progressive housing agenda, so-called quote progressive housing agenda in San Francisco, is that it would, if fully implemented, protect the people who are in units today. Because they would make it illegal to sell them, and illegal to evict them, and illegal to, do anything that would make somebody have to leave the unit they're in. But as those people move out, die, whatever, the unit gets sold to a rich person. And so over time we become like Aspen, where my grandmother owned a ranch in the 1950s when it was still a mining town, basically. And by the way, Aspen votes like San Francisco. It's super progressive. That's like, I think, the outcome of the policies that are kind of in place right now. This sort of well-curated, gated community. To be an urbanist today, I think, means getting really comfortable with change, with flux, with physical transformation, and letting go of the idea of keeping things the way they were. And there's a lot of sadness in that because the city's so great, and so that to watch it change, whether it's your, that's fine, it's fine. It's the little bodega on the corner that you loved gets torn down and a new building goes up. I mean, there's sadness in all of that. Your view gets blocked. You can't park anymore. You got to go somewhere else. I mean, all those little ways it inconveniences you or makes you experience a kind of personal loss of something you liked. You can acknowledge that there's a sadness in all of that. But ethically, it's the right answer. It's the only right answer, is to embrace sort of ceaseless transformation, because not embracing it, or not accepting it at least, means we become a hyper-gentrified, gated community. Just through the mechanisms of, if we're not creating more spots for people, they can't come. It doesn't mean we become a city of erasure, like urban renewal, or like Chinese cities today, where you sort of tear down everything and build everything all at once. We add carefully, we add in layers, so that each generation gets to make its own contribution to the fabric. But we stop trying to hold on to the past, to our urban agenda. I think that's what the urbanist agenda means today. To me, it's like we have to become an open city once again. Thoughts? Okay, here we go.
It's very sobering on the one hand, and also really exciting. It reminds me, I've spent time in Aspen, and I know people who live around there and who have jobs in Aspen, because it's not like there aren't jobs to service Aspen. It's just that those people now have to drive for 40 minutes to get to those jobs.
Yeah.
And so, you're talking about in an urban setting, it's a little bit different, but how much? Different scale, but to a degree. And I was also last year in Charleston, South Carolina, and here you look closer to home, Mendocino. If you stop, if you arrest the development and keep a place just as it is, then it is a time capsule, and downtown Charleston, much of Charleston is that way.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting time capsule too, because nobody wants to go back to, like 1780 Charleston,
Yeah.
And the historic tours that you'll take around, slavery and around, the economics there and the reality of just life on the street there back in the day. It's not like anybody's looking for that. But in order to keep it in that sort of Disneyfied version of what that place more or less was, at least the physical place, right? It's at a great cost. I mean, it's at the cost of the city. It's trying to.
Yeah.
So I live and work in the Mission, and have been ground zero for what's been happening over there. And it is scary when, you know, the sort of controls that are on, you know, like there's planning controls on a building. I mean, the building I own is from the 1860s, so I can't do anything to it, right? And so the question is, you know, if you're talking about what each generation can add to a city, it's like, okay, well, I'll give on this building as a whole, you know, at least the exterior because it's a thing and it should persist.
Yeah.
But to what degree, you know? And at what density, frankly. So,
Yeah. So,
I think a lot depends on what the ideas are that are underlying the change, you know, what's sponsoring it, and I kind of hold out hope for carving out places in cities that allow for some experimentation that aren't all planned out and perfect, so that ideas can be, in a way, prototyped and generate advocacy kind of from the bottom up.
yeah.
And it's really hard to do because economic forces don't want ragtag unresolved corners in the
Right.
city, but I just feel like
It's hard to get a spot
to make that happen.
to experiment with because it takes so much money to get that spot.
But it encourages the kind of dialogue that from at that kind of early level that make people excited about the benefits of change rather than always worrying that it's being imposed by some top-down mechanism that they don't understand how it's generated. And I don't know if you've ever thought about how one could make more of that possible. You know, I'm a Gates Valley person, so the proxy and the little honor of ideas, and all that has been so important for building coalitions of diverse types of people to come and advocate.
Yeah, and it's created a little bit. I mean, I think Hayes Valley and the Market Octavia plan is like the greatest success story. In some ways, it's like everybody, like the long-time homeowning residents, feel like it's a better neighborhood. Like the amenity value, the quality of life improved while a bunch of housing got added.
Because they were in on the conception. I started with the ideas. Like, okay, let's welcome density, but not the cars that would have come with it, and other things like that. You know.
For whatever reason, it hasn't been replicated in any other neighborhood plan. And none of the other ones turned out that way.
Every way to tear it down.
yeah.
Well, there was this. Well, that to me is the fundamental difference. Is here, change was inevitable.
Yeah.
Things are going to change, and you get to direct what path it will take.
I remember collecting signatures for one of the 3 campaigns to tear down the freeway. And I was in Dolores Park. It was a wine troupe performance going on. So I'm like, cool, I'm gonna. And I remember I came up to this group of guys, and they were like, "No fucking way! If you tear that freeway down, Hayes Valley is going to be all rich people." And of course they were right, but it's worth doing it anyway. And, it's like if that's your only lens of like, don't make any place better because if it's better, there will be more demand to be there. It's not a good lens.
It was pitched as a land grab by property owners, even though most of the people advocating for it were renters.
Yeah.
But you touched on some really important things. So I think in the case of Hayes Valley, there was a boogeyman. The freeway was a boogeyman to assault. But I think the most important part, you touched on a couple things, serendipity, which I really think we're losing. Like the 80s was a great time for the weird import-export shop and the funky little business and the artist shop and survival research labs. There were all of these semi-vacant industrial facilities that nurtured all kinds of craziness. And when I think, every last one of those is now being turned into condos, whether market rate or affordable, we're losing a lot of that I think of it culturally as a tide line. You know, it's that place that's neither dirt nor water. Strange things happen in the floods. And we're losing all of those non-program spaces. So I'm really interested in what the Rappaports are doing in Dogpatch to see if that can be artificially created with the arts community. So we lose the serendipity. But I think what's been difficult for a lot of people along the way is the extent to which people feel that their needs and desires are included in planning. And when mammoth things happened in the 50s and 60s were so much about mammoth things. And now we have mammoth things going all over the city. So I think it's very interesting we're building, because I think one of the interesting things about that firm is that they have incorporated a giving back to every community that their projects have touched.
Yeah.
You know, I look at the mission and think people are complaining because all those buildings that are going up have nothing to do with the mission. And I remember when it was still Irish, forget, let me go. But, you know, so there's not a lot of placemaking that occurs, and we are designing the city piecemeal in a lot of cases. So Octavia had a boogeyman, and it had a holistic approach that created something that gave back to the community. And I think that's missing too much in some of the behemoth planning that goes on. And people fear that lack of, I won't say input, because the input's messy, but that concern for human scale.
Yeah, I don't, it's really hard to imagine, it's like, there's such intense pressure on this place now of people wanting to be here, having those spaces to kind of try new things and experiment, which requires that they not be super expensive. It's very hard to imagine that happening in the kind of the old way of kind of spontaneous organic re-inhabitation of semi-abandoned structures, because there are no semi-abandoned structures.
I disagree profoundly. There are semi-abandoned sidewalks, other permission that are being inhabited very experimentally, right? I mean, and this is, like, I look at that and I think, well, what do I think of this? I mean, these are my neighbors living on the streets, right? And
What do you think?
I'm at a loss, frankly. I feel afraid for my safety on one hand. Like, for instance, I got a flat tire riding on Bayshore the other day, so I had to walk through the tangle that connects under the 101. And I don't have a problem riding through there because it's brief and people are usually, you know, like, keep to the sides or whatever. But I have to say, that was really unpleasant and unsafe because not necessarily interacting with the people, but because the people had taken over the sidewalks. I had to walk with my bike in the street, and the street there is the freeway.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean about personal safety.
Yeah.
I don't feel that unsafe walking down, say, Harrison Street or 19th Street where the encampments are.
All right, well,
But
good point.
so
Good point that that's experimentation. I will just say, and
marginal and quite
marginal, in the sense that our other speakers meant it, I believe. It's hard where you could hold a punk rock show in the old warehouse. Well, the old warehouse now has some little chocolate boutique maker in it. The old warehouse is not available to be inhabited by something that doesn't pay the rent anymore. And so, just as it's very hard to live in this place